Hi everyone, it's so lovely to see some familiar faces as well as some new faces. Welcome to the last virtual coffee hour of the semester, although more to come in the spring. We are grateful that you're making time to join us today despite busy schedules, time differences, and everything. So it's our great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mariam Kurtz. Mariam is a visiting scholar at George Mason University's School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, where she also earned her PhD. She has also recently served as a fellow at the Harvard Center for African Studies. Today, Dr. Mariam Kurtz will talk about her most recent book titled Recolonizing Africa, an ethnography of land acquisition, mining, and resource control. Previously, she has also published a book on woman, war, and violence, as well as numerous scholarly articles. But without further ado, Dr. Kurtz, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. 2015, I attended the International Women Judges Conference that took place in Arusha, Tanzania. And when I was there, I had a conversation with many judges, and that's where the idea of this book was born. Later, I took those ideas and I expanded and to get a larger picture and to answer some of the questions that I had for a long time. I was curious about the role of Africa has in the global economy. And also, I had this question for a long time about why Africa is poor and dependent, while the continent has abundant, layer, and significant natural resources for high-tech industry, as well as for manufacturing electric vehicles. So when I was in that conference, I met judges from Australia and Africa. And in my conversation with them, they raised the issue of land conflict. Then after that conference, I went back to Dar es Salaam. And in Dar es Salaam, I met with the lawyers as well as some journalists, and they brought the issue of land acquisition being a problem in a country. So from that point, I had two concepts. One is land acquisition, another one is land conflict. Then I decided to add the mining, because mining is the major driver of conflict in many places. For example, when you look at the endless wars in the DRC and also Sudan, the wars between two generals and coups in West Africa, they're all about resource control. Then the next step of having those ideas, I decided to find a research site, a place where I can conduct my research. And in that process, I was going to Mwadui Diamond Mine, but the bus driver dropped me in Bulyanhulu by mistake. And I mean, he dropped me there. I wasn't intended to go to Bulyanhulu. My intention was to go to Mwadui Diamond Mine, but bus driver dropped me in Bulyanhulu and he took off. I remember that day was night and it was dark. Then when I got to that bus stop, the bus stop was deserted. And after I got out, I saw a small group of men. They looked like they were having coffee. Then I decided to call for a taxi. So one of the men in that group heard me, and he repeated after me. He said, "Taxi." Then this young man showed up with a bicycle, and I said, "I need a taxi," and he said, "These are taxis around here." Therefore, I decided to place my suitcase in that bicycle, and we started walking. And later, I asked that man, a few steps later, I asked that man to take me to a guest house, which is very near to Mwadui Diamond Mine. And the young man, he looked at me and he said, "Sister, we are not in Mwadui. This is Bulyanhulu." And I expressed my frustration because this is not the place I wanted to be. I want to be Mwadui. And he asked me, "What are you looking for?" then that's the point I said, explain to him that I'm a researcher, I'm looking for the mining site. Then he responded to me. He said, while we are walking, he said, you know what? It's possible where we're walking right now here, there are probably people working underground, digging gold. And that is how I found out I was in Bulyanhulu, which is one of the largest gold mine in Africa. The time when I started that this project, and Bulyanhulu was the third largest gold mine in the continent. By the time I finished research, Bulyanhulu was number 4, so instead of number 3. And today, Bulyanhulu is number 7. So these mining sites getting ranked based on how much it has produced and extracted outside the country. So while I was there in Bulyanhulu doing my research, I discovered there are so many conflicts and also corporate scandals. And first, that's an example, Barrick, which is a main extractor of gold and other minerals in Tanzania and other African countries, and its subsidiaries like Acacia, a Kahama mining company, they failed to pay taxes to Tanzanian government for almost 2 decades. That was a scandal. Another scandal was Barrick and its subsidiaries had evicted local people from their land and never compensate them, and for almost 2 decades. And those who were paid compensation, that compensation was inadequate. So I met Elizabeth Mwanangeni and her family. They told me that they were paid $40 for their larger farm, which now is occupied by Barrick Gold. And also I found the aspect of crash civilization, which was become a conflict there. And because mining company, when they went to Bulyanhulu, they acquire land, right? And also when they acquire land, because they are either European companies, Canadian companies, they treat land as individual ownership. So therefore, they treated this land in Bulyanhulu as a private property with exclusive rights. So water sources, plants, herbs were fenced in, and also thorns were planted to keep local people out of that land. So this corporate practice contradicted local people perception of land being communal, because for these local people, land is sacred and land is a communal survival. In that sense, land is shared. Strangers are allowed to graze their cows and pick wild vegetables, fruits from each other's land. Rules and laws to protect communal land were established, and the people take responsibility to protect that communal land. So this also, when you look at idea of Jared Hardin of Tragedy of the Common, will not explain, will contradict also this practice of communal land, because for him, he said the communal land, local people might abuse, individual might abuse the communal land because they might be selfish, and they might overgraze and destroy the land. So for him, this was like odd when you look at, if you apply this, the idea of tragedy of the common for people in Bulyanhulu, will be contradicting also as an example. So, and why I'm calling this book Recolonizing Africa? I call this book Recolonizing Africa because I found a parallel between old colonialism of 19th century and the new scramble for Africa today. And those parallels, for example, both times corporations were involved in extracting minerals. And also a mining export is a driving force behind both scrambles. And also the language of development has been used back then during the colonial time coming to Africa. Development is, they look at development as a way to come in. and today the same. So during colonial era, lexicon of development, of developing and civilizing was used. Like these colonial powers that are coming Africa, being development, building road infrastructure, also to civilize Africa as well, to develop the country, the continent. Today, the lexicon has shifted from civilizing and developing to just development. Because of the language development, African leaders are attracted to that language because those African leaders need revenues, they need infrastructure development, they need employment for their youth, and healthcare and so forth. So therefore, they gave concession to these mining companies to extract minerals and exchange for infrastructure development. So I'm using an example of the China Belt and Road Initiative, for example. After a structure adjustment program, deregulation and privatization, that had opened doors to other actors to come to Africa to extract minerals, because during colonial time was only colonial powers are doing it. So after structure adjustment program, the different venue was opened, and others actors came in, and China was one of them, took advantage of that. So FDI flow surge of Chinese from 75 million on 2003 to US dollars 4.2 billion in 2020. That's really big. So this data is from China Africa Initiative, Research Initiative of 2022. So, and when the Chinese come to Africa, they came to Africa with their banks also to provide loans and funds. And also in that sense, because of the money, they gain influence in Africa. And actually, China was there with African relations, where they have a relationship for a long time, since the time of decolonization. But them coming, this new door open for them, and having that amount of money to African, it helped them to gain much influence in the continent. And that influence helped them to secure the natural resources. As a result, African natural resources become collateral for these innovations and development. So also, I found the ideology of race being used to justify those kind of exploitations of Africa from natural resources. Race and racism in extractive industry often hidden and assumed irrelevant because they are covered by racial codes. Race and racism, for me, I found myself, I was one of those people being blinded by this racial code and see things differently, until the murder of George Floyd. That made me conscious of the issue of race, because as you remember that time, everywhere they are talking about race and racism in a protest and everywhere. Then COVID hits, the issue of inequality, who is having access to COVID vaccination, to African people to be given. So those kind of things also kind of I become more conscious of race. Then I started thinking about the book. That, oh, something is missing here, the issue of race. And even though in dissertation, when I do early on during my dissertation process, when I interview the local people, they brought the issue of race. They were expressing their dissatisfaction in a racial language, but I did not look at it as a significant and relevant to my project. So, but this is a very interesting thing, because the government officials, when I interviewed them, they did not talk about race issue, okay? And I wanted to interview investors. They did not let me doing the work to interview them. So I never have like a direct contact with the investors. But these villagers who are uneducated, most of them, they cannot read and write. They are the ones they are conscious of being victim of racial injustice in the village. So for in looking about explore that language of racial language, as I said, I did not have access to the investors, but I was able to read and follow other documents that lead me and other research, like Butler's research on, because he was able to interview, she was able to interview investors. And I found a colorblind ideology. This colorblind ideology is common and is used as a tool to racialize system of exploitation. Colorblind help to divert process of racial injustice some people might feel. So I'm using an example of where this is ideology of colorblind ideology. So as I said at the beginning, that Barrick Gold failed to pay taxes to Tanzanian government for almost 2 decades. So in 2020, they had a settlement between Tanzania and the Barrick Gold based on tax fraud. And in that settlement, Barrick Gold sent its top executives who were white male South Africans. Then in those top executives were president and the CEO of Barrick Gold, Mark Bistro, and Willem Jacobs. So when they are talking in that settlement ceremony, right? So it was a time for Mark Bistro to introduce himself to the president that back then was the president of Tanzania, late John Magufuli. And Mark Bistro, he said, he introduced himself as Zulu boy, born in Zululand. Then after he finished speaking, introducing himself in that kind of language, Willem Jacobs also was stand up. He went in front and started speaking, and open quote, he said, "Don't judge me by my skin color. I am just an African like you. I'm your fellow African and relative." The room, they're so happy, clap their hands, applause him. And so things keep going. So let's look how women were affected by all this kind of exploitation and the ideology just that justify this system of exploitation, while other people are benefiting from natural resources of African and some are not, including women. So in Bulyanhulu, I found intersectionality of race, gender, class that play a role in this part of the mining village. So let me explain a little bit how is that. So before gold was discovered in Bulyanhulu, land was under male clan members. Women were accessing land based on marital status, rank in marriage, ability to give birth, particularly sons. After gold was discovered in 1975, land was commodified. That means land has a value, then it becomes commodity, right? Land holding shifted from communal land held by male clan members to nuclear family. That means mother, father, and children. So, but when their husbands passed away, widows were able to inherit that land from the deceased husband. And that's where women gained their direct access to land for the first time in Bulyanhulu. So having access to land, they were able to develop microfinancing scheme, they own land, they share land with the women, they rotate land, different farms for different women. They're able to grow vegetables, fruits, and sell them and make money. And men, they will bring them leftover sand with the gold from the small scale miners, and they will clean them, get extra gold, and sell them also. They made money, and they support each other that way. They are very happy, those women. And I met these women in a focus group, and many of them, they are there. There are so many of them still alive, and but some were sick, and they could not afford medical care, right? Because that system of financial system all were lost. So I'm going forward because I was a little hiding. So when mining companies came, 1996, women were evicted from their land by mining companies. So that means they lost their land, they lost their social and economic support groups. So in focus group, they told me, so some women, after they lost their land, they move away and they never came back. And those who stayed in Bulyanhulu, they become landless and poor. And because of unequal distribution of benefits and burden, not only women in Bulyanhulu were affected or become landless and poor, but also almost the whole continent, except those Africans elites who have benefiting directly from the mining. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kurtz. That was a fantastic summary overview of your book and your research. I will now pause the recording and we will move on to the Q&A.